It's basically a digital archive charting the history and development of the entire Persian Gulf region, and it's a collaborative venture between the British Library, the Qatar National Library, and the Qatar Foundation. The last of those, the Qatar Foundation, is a non-profit organisation supporting innovations in education, science, research, and community development, which is very kindly supporting the project. We've been on the go for about 6 years now, and one of the main aims of the resource is to be a fully bilingual resource, both English and Arabic. We've got about 2 million records. In fact, we're expecting to put the 2 millionth one on in the next month or so, and we'll be having a bit of a celebration about that. And very importantly, all the text and images are freely available either to view or download from the website, and many of them, although I must add not all of them, are also free to reuse. To reuse, you simply apply on an individual basis to the QDL. There's no paywall whatsoever in front of the website, but you may be subject to copyright charges if you want to republish material from it. But for your own personal use, it's all completely free. So the plan for today, we're going to have a little look at what material we've actually got in the Qatar Digital Library. We're going to have a closer look at the maps and where those maps have come from. We'll have a little look at the digitization process, and also a look at a few of the maps that we've got in the library. So first of all, to have a look at what's actually in the QDL. Well, the first thing that we really need to do is to have a look at the geographical extent of the project. And the geographical extent, you can see here, you can just about make out the Arabian Peninsula beneath the shading. The high priority area in the red is around about a 250 to 300 mile radius around the Persian Gulf, and obviously you can see Qatar, in the middle there, and we'll have pretty well any material of interest from within that radius. And as we go out into the green areas of the map, we'll tend to have more material that is of particular interest. So for example, if there was a particular trade link or something like that, we would tend to have that. So in terms of what's actually in the QDL, we can look at that in terms of the different materials we've got and where those materials have come from. The first sort of materials we've got are items from the India Office files. These are now held at the British Library since independence in India in 1947, and we have a lot of files from various parts of the India Office, and we'll come on to those in a little while. We also have private papers from a lot of the personalities who worked within the India within the India Office and with India. So for example, people like Lord Curzon, or as this example is from Sir Lewis Pelly, who was political resident out in the Gulf during the 1860s. We also have in the British Library quite a large collection of manuscripts. We have some Arabic scientific manuscripts as well, and those are part of the QDL now. And this particular one is, I think, a treatise on astronomy that was produced in 1458 in Samarkand, in what's now Uzbekistan. Many of the maps that were produced also came along with expedition logs and ship's logs as well, and those are also incorporated in the QDL. We also have quite a large number of views. This particular one by Kate Toynbee from 1880. This is the view from her ship about to anchor in Aden. We also have a number of audio recordings. Most of these are shellac discs, mostly from the early part of the 20th century, 1920s, 1930s, very typical. I think we've got about 200 of those on the site. And also, of course, the maps, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a while. This particular one is of oil concession areas in the 1940s. And often accompanying many of the maps, of course, were other geographical materials such as gazetteers, this one being the cover page from John Gordon Lorimer's seminal Gazetteer of Arabia, which also included the Francis Fraser Hunter map from 1908. So, looking in a little bit more detail about where the maps have come from. Some of them are found within the India Office files. This particular one comes from the files from the Political and Secret Department of the India Office from 1910, this one. And this is a file on the ship Royal Indian Marine Service Palinurus. Now, Palinurus was a specialist mapping and surveying vessel, hydrographic surveying vessel, and we just zoom into that. You can see here some of the plans that were being made for where Palinurus should do her next hydrographic surveying voyage. We've also got, as well as the India Office files, we've got the India Office record map collection. Now, this was the official map collection of the India Office, and there's about 14,000 sheets which are all held at the British Library. This particular one showing tribal areas in Southwest Arabia from 1839, quite a nice map. It's a printed map with watercolor wash. We also have some maps from the War Office archive. This is the old, what was the Ministry of Defence map library, which the British Library now holds. This one was from 1917, and if we just zoom into it a little bit more, it shows a raid on the Hejaz Railway. Oops, I think we've gone the wrong way. Shows a raid on the Hejaz Railway in what is now the western part of Saudi Arabia, and this was made by an officer called Major Herbert Garland, and Garland was a contemporary of Lawrence of Arabia. In fact, he taught Lawrence of Arabia pretty much everything he knows about explosives and so on, and he gives them a very commendable mention in his 7 Pillars of Wisdom. And this was a quick lightning raid made from the Red Sea port of Waj onto the railway at a place called Tawaira, which was about 130 miles northeast of Medina. We also have some native Arabic mapping. This particular sheet is showing the pearl banks in the Persian Gulf, this one from the Bushire Political Residency Records, 1940. And I'd just like to zoom into a couple of areas on this map. The first one being the Qatar Peninsula itself. You can probably see the outline of Qatar around here. And the map in Arabic, the marks in the sea, these are soundings in Arabic numerals. Not particularly clear to see that the black areas are islands, the Hawa Islands here, for example, and the other areas here, these other right down areas are the pearl banks themselves, some of them named. And the other bit I'd like to zoom into is this little note which appears in the bottom right hand corner of the map, which gives it title, but it also interestingly the note starts and ends with a short prayer in Arabic, and the stamp at the bottom, there is a stamp at the bottom, not particularly clear, but it It does actually. It is actually a note to say that the map must not be translated under any circumstances into any other language without the author's consent. So, going back to our plan for today, then we've looked at what's in the Qatar Digital Library. We've had a quick look at where some of the maps have come from, and what we're going to do now is to have a little bit of a look at the digitization process. So in terms of capturing the maps, the first thing that we do is we scope the material. We've got a huge number of maps in the British Library, about 4 million of them. And the first part is the scoping, selecting the appropriate material, and that's my job, the job of the map curator. This is a look at our India office map room. We've probably got about 20 or 30,000 maps in there, and it's an absolute Aladdin's cave. You can open a drawer and there's beautiful stuff in every drawer. It's a real pleasure being in there. So once we've decided on the maps, about 15% of them on average require some sort of conservation work. The Qatar project is a big project. We've got 3 full-time conservators working on the project, and some of the stuff can be quite nasty to repair. I have to say we noticed this in the War Office, and again with British produced maps here. I think around about 1910, the British government took delivery of a large load of a very poor quality tracing paper, or it tended to be poor quality, and over the years it just has gone so brittle and just flakes away, and there's a large amount of material that looks like this, and it's an absolute nightmare to conserve. And as soon as you take it out of the drawer, another 3 bits fall off, and it's invariably being repaired with conservators' worst nightmare of the sellotape. Anyway, once the maps have been conserved, we go into cataloging, so that they are digitally searchable, and any catalogers among the audience today will immediately recognize that as the dreaded IAMS. And after cataloging, it's then translated. The catalog record is translated from English into Arabic, and again we have a full-time translation team on the project of about 4 or 5 translators, and so basically the whole website has an Arabic translation. So essentially it is two websites, one in English and one in Arabic. From there on, the maps go for imaging. We image at a very high resolution, about 600 dots per inch, or the equivalent. This is this War Office map again, towards the Hejaz Railway. If we zoom into this area here, the area we looked at last time, that little extract of map I've given you is about 6 centimeters across on the actual sheet, and so that's a pretty high resolution. Some of the images are photographed, some are scanned, so it's very good quality material. The next thing is sorry, oh, I'm so sorry, my phone seems to have gone off. Oh, sorry. I do apologise for that. So the next thing we do is we have copyright clearance. Most of the maps we have no problem with the copyright at all, but there are the occasional map for which we can't obtain copyright clearance to go on the website, and in that instance what happens is the catalogue record for the map goes up, and sorry, someone's cleaning my windows now. This is unbelievable. I do apologise. Oh, excuse me, could you leave this one for about about 20 minutes? Yeah, 20 minutes. Yeah, I'm on a conference. Cheers. I'm so sorry about that. You could guarantee this was going to happen. Anyway, as I say, the ones which we can't obtain copyright clearance for, we do still put them up on, we put the catalogue record up on the map and up on the website, and we just don't put the image on the website. And after that, it all goes through to quality assurance, after which it's uploaded onto the website. What I'd like to do in the time that we've got remaining is I'd like to have a look at a couple of maps, just out of interest, really, a couple of interesting ones that I've pulled out of the collection. The first one, the diagram of Duzdap station in Persia, or now Zahedan in Iran, from 1920. This was the mapping that was produced when they first opened the railway to this part of Persia. It's in southeast Persia. The map itself is not particularly interesting, but the railway has rather an interesting story. The station, newly built in 1920, is still there today. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom in again a little bit. As I say, the map itself not particularly exciting unless you're into the sort of railway wiring diagram type things. But just to put it in a little bit more context, Zahedan is here, or Duzdap as it was in those days, and it was the western terminus, or became the western terminus, of the Trans-Baluchistan Railway, which was a railway which went from British India, or Pakistan as it is now, and it went through Qatar and onto Duzdap. And the route from Duzdap to Qatar was part of a strategic military route between India and Persia during the First World War. And the railway eventually reached Duzdap on the 1st of October in 1922. But the problem was that by the time it eventually reached Duzdap, the military events had overtaken it, and the British had already demobilised their army in March 1921. So the main reason for the railway's construction had gone before it had even opened. Unsurprisingly, the railway was therefore very little used, and it was in fact closed just 9 years later in 1931, and the 220 kilometres of track between Qatar and Duzdap was lifted. However,
Nick, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. But sure enough, during World War II, the railway was needed again, and so the track was relayed in the early 1940s when British forces opened a supply line to aid Russian forces against Germany in Persia. But the plans never came to fruition, and so for the second time in its history, it had been constructed for what appeared to be no reason. But this time the tracks were kept, and the line was extended westwards to Tehran in 2009, and it still remains open. Just a second map which I'd like to show you. This is a really quite beautiful map, quite different to the very functional railway map. This is a hand-drawn manuscript map with watercolour wash, the oases of El Hassa. El Hassa, just on the eastern part of very close to the eastern coast of Saudi Arabia. And El Hassa is in fact the largest oasis in the world. It's about 85 square kilometres. We'll just zoom into a little bit of it. You can see this is an adjacent fort of a local dignitary, I think. And within the fort of El Hassa, you've got the citadel there. Part B, as you can see from the quay, is the Bedouin quarter. The glacis, part C, a glacis is a steep artificial slope which is obviously made for defensive purposes for the citadel. And then you've got various houses and cultivated areas around it. you can see from the that the map it has various palm trees on it. These are indeed date palms. Today there are over 2.5 million palms producing about 100,000 tons of dates a year in the oasis area. And also on the map there are, quite unusually for Arabia, around in this area there are some rice grounds, and rice is obviously quite an unusual crop in Arabia, but because of the oasis situation it's perfectly feasible to grow it in those areas. The area has been settled for an awful long time. There are archaeological remains going back to Neolithic times, and certainly that predated Islam. And today the whole area is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and National Park. So I think my 25 minutes is just about up. So we'll call it a day for there. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope I've enlightened you at least a little bit into the Qatar Digital Library, which is an absolutely fantastic resource supported by the Qatar Foundation, Qatar National Library, and the British Library. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. Are there any questions, Sarah?
Thank you, Colin. Yes, I can see a question now from Virginia, and she's asking, will the presentation and slides be available for participants? This is maybe more for Chris or you, Colin.
Chris, did you want to say something?
We are planning to put recordings of the presentations and the Q&A sessions up fairly soon after the event. We haven't been planning to put the presentations up, but that might be possible.
Yeah, certainly from my end, I'm happy for that.
Thank you.
I can't see any question. Anyone else? Please type your question in the Q&A section. I have a question, Nick.
Yes.
How many maps the project is digitized already so far, and what are the plans for the future?
Right, so far we've got about 1,300 maps digitized on the project. They mostly come from the India Office Record Map Library, but we've also got in phase 3 of the project, the current project, we've also got some more maps from the India Office records to put up. We've got some maps from the India Office files to put up, particularly from the political and secret department. There are also, if there is time, maps from the War Office archive as well. But obviously, progress has been hindered somewhat by the pandemic. We've obviously spent about 4 months working at home, and nobody was back in the library at all. We've now got about 50% of the team working about 50% in the library and 50% at home. And obviously we need to get in the library, particularly to select the maps, and also for the imaging team to digitize them as well. So there's some talks going on between the British Library and the Qatar National Library about how we're going to manage that. But there's certainly going to be a lot more going on.
Thank you. And I have a question from Jana. Are there any stats about the use of the digitized maps, and who is using them, in which countries are used, etc.?
They're being used a lot in both in English-speaking world and also in the Arabian Peninsula themselves, particularly in Qatar. They're being used by a wide range of people, and what we have noticed is that quite a few research articles which are being published on the Gulf area are actually acknowledging us as a source of information, and particularly they're acknowledging what we really intended was that they can work on this material from wherever they're living in the world, rather than having the restriction of having to come into London to look at the material in the BL, which obviously, if you're living on the Arabian Peninsula, is very difficult indeed. So that they are getting a lot of use.
Thank you. I'll just pick these two more questions because I don't know if we have enough time. So Marina is asking whether the same digitization standards apply to all the material, and if are all the images captured at 600 dpi?
Yes, they are. They're all at 600 dpi, and that's particularly important because obviously a lot of the documents are in Arabic, and of course the Arabic language has some very fine diacritics, dots, and what appear like sort of comma type marks, and it's in the very ornate script. It's really essential to get that level of detail. So absolutely everything, text and maps, are being digitized at that sort of level. Yes.
Thank you, Nick. So there are so many questions.
We have time for a few more questions. We have
few more questions. Okay, so Gil is asking, what percentage of the material in copyright is copyright uncleared? Do you ever receive requests to remove maps from the database?
As far as I know, we haven't received them. The British Library has a licensing team who are copyright specialists. It's headed up by somebody who is a solicitor with a specialism in copyright law, and so we are very careful, and we rarely make mistakes on the copyright. And as I say, if we find one that we can't clear copyright from, we don't put it on the website. So everything there is free to download for personal use. But as I say, if you do want to go and reproduce some, particularly on a commercial basis, you do need to check with us to ensure that the copyright is clear for that, or whether you have to go and contact the copyright holder yourself to do that.
Thank you. I just saw an interesting one about geotagging. So are these any of these maps geotagged and or made searchable, especially the ones in Arabic?
Yes, there are keywords are highlighted in all of the records, and the Explorer Archives and Manuscripts catalogue at the BL. You can search by any word and it will bring it up.
Thank you. I'll probably just read a last one, and then for the other ones you can maybe also type directly in the Q&A. So Ashraf is asking, what are the earliest maps that can be found in QDL or the BL India office room? Regarding to Arabian maps, is there any map that depicts the expansion of Ottomans, perhaps post the early 17th century?
Wonderful question, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the map which I showed today of the document from the scientific manuscript comes from about 1458, from what's now Uzbekistan, and that is the sort of really about the earliest time we've got materials. After the foundation of the East India Company in round about 1600, we do start to get a lot more material. In terms of mapping that shows the expansion of the Ottoman Empire, we do hold quite a bit of mapping of that at the British Library, yes. That's the question, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we have 1 minute for a last one. This might be very quick. Can you search by coordinates on the maps?
Yes, you can. Connected to most of the maps, there is a little link to the Google Maps square which comes up, which shows the sheet boundaries of the maps. So they are searchable in that sense.
And then there is maybe a broader one, which is what are the major challenges in maps digitization? You have 1 minute to answer that.
The main challenge, I think, is not so much with fine print. At 600 DPI, we can cope with most fine print, but it's particularly with conservation and the time and effort that goes into that. Sometimes, particularly if you get, rather than a single map, if you get an atlas and the whole atlas needs conservation, that's a very timely job, and I think that's probably the main challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for coordinating the questions. And Nick, a special thank you to you for giving us a fascinating talk. And one can see from the questions all the issues that we're dealing with. And if anybody has wants to have any further discussion with Nick on this, I'm sure you can contact him in the British Library. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.